Have you ever carried something with you for so long that you stopped noticing the weight? Not a secret, not a scandal, just a memory, a word, a silence that should have been addressed but never was. Then one day, at 80, you realize the one thing you never said could be the very thing that sets you free. I was wrong. Those 3 words are not a surrender. They are a declaration of truth, strength, and finally, peace. Let's explore this act of emotional courage in depth. Why it's so hard, why it matters, and how it changes everything. 1. The silent burden of regret. Let's start here. Regret is one of the most universal human emotions, and yet, one of the most misunderstood. Most people think regret is loud, but the truth is, regret is quiet. It hums in the background of your daily life. It's in the photograph you avoid looking at. It's in the name you hesitate to bring up at family gatherings. It's in the way your chest tightens, just a little at night, when you're alone and unguarded. Let's meet Edwin, 82, a former train conductor from Yorkshire. He hadn't spoken to his son in over a decade because of a heated disagreement, one about values, politics, and respect. But underneath all the surface arguments was something far more human. Hurt. For years, Edwin justified his silence. He told himself, he was the one who walked out. He owes me the apology. I did the best I could. But deep down, a small voice persisted. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I didn't listen. That voice grew louder with time. One day, after a minor health scare, Edwin picked up the phone and called his son. He didn't launch into an explanation. He simply said, I was wrong. I miss you. Those 5 seconds of vulnerability did what 14 years of silence never could. They opened the door again. Regret unspoken calcifies into loneliness. But regret owned and voiced? That's redemption. 2. Why it gets harder, but more important with age. This might surprise you. Admitting fault becomes harder as we age. Shouldn't it be easier? Shouldn't wisdom bring humility? In theory, yes. But real life is far more complicated. By 70, 80, or 90, you've built a life story, an identity made up of choices, beliefs, and justifications. To say, I was wrong, isn't just correcting a moment. It often feels like rewriting your autobiography. It threatens the narrative you've spent decades protecting. Lucille, now 81, is a nurse, a widow, and a mother of 4. She prided herself on her resilience. She worked 2 jobs, kept the house standing, and raised her children with tough love. Her daughter, now grown, once confided, You never told me I was enough. Lucille's first instinct? Defensiveness. She thought, I gave everything. I sacrificed. How could she not see that? But later that night, lying in bed, she faced something deeper. She hadn't known how to express affection. She loved deeply, but showed it through structure, not softness. The next morning, she looked at her daughter and said, You were right. I was wrong not to tell you more often that you were enough. You always were. And just like that, years of quiet distance began to dissolve. At 80, you don't need to cling to pride. You've already proven your strength by surviving life. Now is the time to prove your grace. 3. The difference between guilt and grace. Here's a powerful distinction. Guilt punishes. Grace liberates. Guilt says, I failed. I'm unworthy. Grace says, I failed and I'm still worthy. Saying I was wrong is often avoided because people confuse it with shame. But in truth, it's a portal to healing. Let's revisit David, a retired firefighter from Brisbane. He had always been a strict, distant father, stoic, unemotional, hard to read. When his grandson came out as gay, David froze. He didn't react badly, but he also didn't react with warmth. The silence was deafening. Months later, after reflection, he wrote a letter. I was wrong not to embrace you in that moment. I let my discomfort speak louder than my love. I want you to know, I'm proud of who you are. That letter sits framed on his grandson's wall today. Grace is what happens when we own our mistakes without owning shame. We say, I failed in that moment, but I choose now to be better. That's the sacred power of mature humility. 4. How it changes generations. The moment you say, I was wrong, as a parent or grandparent, you do something radical. You give permission for others to be human too. You normalize imperfection. You deconstruct the myth that love means being always right. You create an emotional environment where people can breathe, forgive, and open up. Let's meet Margaret, 78, a retired schoolteacher in Toronto. Her teenage grandson was beginning to rebel. Poor grades, sullen silences, cold dinners. One day, he finally exploded. You treat me like a disappointment before you even ask what's wrong. She paused, and instead of lecturing him, she did something rare. She said, I was wrong to assume. I forgot what it's like to be young and lost. I'm sorry. That moment turned their relationship around. Her grandson later wrote her a letter saying, You made me feel seen when I felt invisible. When elders admit their humanity, they model emotional responsibility. It's not just a correction, it's a legacy. 5. The fear of rejection and why it's worth the risk. There's always a risk in vulnerability. You might not get the response you want. You might get silence. You might get pain. But ask yourself this. What hurts more, being rejected or never trying at all? Tom, 84, had an estranged brother, Paul. They hadn't spoken since a falling out in their 20s over money. Tom carried bitterness for years, but as the years passed, it turned to ache. One Christmas, Tom sent a card. No grand speech. Just these words. Paul, I was wrong to let something so small steal our brotherhood. I miss you. He never heard back. But Tom told his daughter, even if I never hear from him, at least I'm no longer holding the grudge. It doesn't live in me anymore. Apologizing is not about outcome. It's about alignment with your truth, with your heart. The freedom comes in the saying, not the response. 6. When we say it and when we can't. What if the person you wronged is gone? What if they passed away? What if their mind is no longer clear? Does that mean the healing is over? Absolutely not. Healing doesn't always require two people. Sometimes, healing happens in solitude. Sandra, 76, lost her husband to dementia. In the early years of their marriage, she had been emotionally distant, afraid of intimacy because of her own upbringing. In his final year, she would sit by his bedside and whisper, I'm sorry I didn't let you in sooner. I was wrong to close myself off. You loved me anyway, and I see that now. He never responded, but Sandra says, those words were more for me than for him. I needed to say them. I needed to feel forgiven by life. Write the letter. Speak the words out loud. Pray them into the wind. Healing doesn't need an audience. It just needs honesty. 7. Your legacy is not perfection, it's courage. When you die, people won't remember how right you were. They'll remember how real you were, how brave you were, how much of your heart you left behind in others. Saying I was wrong at 80 is not weakness. It's leadership. It tells your children, you can make mistakes and still be good. It tells your grandchildren, you don't need to be perfect to be loved. It tells the world, growth doesn't stop. Not at 50, not at 70, not at 90. This is the legacy of truth. Not spotless, not flawless, but full of grace. So now, dear friend, who do you think of when you hear this? Whose name rises in your mind? Whose eyes do you still wish would meet yours? If only for a moment of understanding. You don't have to wait for the perfect time. You just need to decide that now is better than never. If this touched something in you, please share your story in the comments. What moment of I was wrong transformed you, or still lingers in your heart? Like, subscribe, and share this with someone whose soul could use a little lightness today. And remember, you are never too old to heal, never too late to speak truth, and always worthy of peace.